Everyone in the room expected the little girl to fail until Keanu Reeves stepped out of the shadows and changed everything. What he witnessed that day was more than talent. It was a cry for help, and the choice he made next would expose a truth no one was prepared for. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The video begins with shaky phone footage, the kind usually taken by someone who never intended to record anything important. The camera wobbles, settling just as a crowded after-school community center comes into view. Children fill the room with restless energy, sitting in plastic chairs that scrape against the floor. A few parents stand in the back. Some scroll through their phones. Some chat quietly. On the surface, it looks like any ordinary afternoon showcase, except for the girl at the piano. She cannot be more than 8 years old. Her sweater is 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowing her wrists. Her shoes are scuffed, the kind that look like they have walked through more hard days than playgrounds. She sits at the massive grand piano like she has been dropped into a world too big, too bright, too unforgiving. Her fingers hover above the keys, trembling so visibly the camera captures every shake. The teacher standing beside her is the only adult who does not look nervous. Ms. Darrow watches the girl with a thin smile, arms folded in triumph rather than support. Her voice cuts through the room as sharply as a blade. "This is what happens when someone pretends they can play," she says loud enough for nearby parents to hear. "Talent must be earned, not imagined." A few parents shift uncomfortably. A couple of children glance at each other, sensing something wrong, but too afraid to react. The little girl's breathing becomes shallow. She glances toward the exit like she wants to run, but the room feels too full, too heavy, too locked in place. In the very back of the room, unnoticed by most, stands a tall man in a simple dark jacket. He blends in easily, the kind of presence that does not seek attention. His hair is slightly messy. His hands are tucked into his pockets. No one pays him any mind. After all, people come and go through the community center all the time. To most, he looks like an ordinary neighbor, maybe another parent waiting for his turn. But his eyes tell a different story. Keanu Reeves watches the trembling child with a stillness that feels out of place in the crowded room. His expression is not confused or impatient. It is focused heavy with recognition, as if every shake of the girl's hands reaches into some memory he has spent years trying to protect. His gaze never leaves her, not even for a moment. The teacher leans down toward the girl, her smile twisting tighter. "Go on. Show everyone your little performance, since you insist you belong at this piano." Her tone makes the words drip with humiliation. The girl flinches, her shoulders curl inward. She whispers something the microphone does not catch. Maybe she is apologizing. Maybe she is begging. Maybe she is just trying not to fall apart in front of dozens of strangers. A parent near the camera mutters under their breath, "This doesn't feel right." Ms. Darrow straightens and raises her voice. "Since our little prodigy insists she has talent, she will now play something for all of us. A simple piece. Something she can manage." The girl freezes. Her hands are no longer hovering. They are gripping the edge of the piano bench as if anchoring herself so she does not collapse. Keanu takes one step forward, just one. But the energy in the room shifts instantly. He does not speak. He does not call the teacher out. He simply watches this girl with an intensity that feels protective, gentle, and almost painfully familiar. Because he sees something in her, something fragile, something he has seen before in someone he loved deeply, something he is not willing to watch be broken again. The camera zooms in on the girl's face as tears gather in her lashes, and the world holds its breath. The room grows unnervingly quiet. Too quiet for a place meant to lift children up, too quiet for something that is supposed to be a celebration. Even the youngest kids, who were fidgeting moments earlier, now sit frozen, their eyes darting between the trembling girl and the towering piano she seems terrified to touch. Ms. Darrow places a firm hand on the piano lid, tapping it twice, as if announcing the beginning of a show. Her smile tightens with satisfaction. Let's not waste everyone's time. Begin. The girl's breath catches in her throat. Her fingers rise again, shaking so violently the front row can see it. She tries to steady them by resting her palms on her knees, but her body betrays her. She looks up at the room, filled with curious faces, judgmental eyes, bored expressions. Her chest rises and falls too quickly. Her throat tightens, as if the air itself is pushing against her. Everyone can see she is on the edge of breaking. Keanu sees it most clearly of all. He stands in the back like a shadow carved from stillness, eyes growing darker with every second the child is forced to suffer through this moment. There is no anger on his face, only a deep sorrow that seems carved from an older wound. He has seen this before, the humiliation of someone gentle, the way a child's spirit can be crushed by one careless adult, the way talent can be buried beneath fear before it ever has a chance to bloom. Ms. Darrow gestures with impatience. Any day now. A couple of parents exchange glances. One mother shifts uncomfortably, whispering, "Shouldn't someone help her?" Another shrugs, unsure if speaking up would make it worse. After all, Miss Darrow is the music instructor, the authority, the one who claims to know which students have talent and which ones do not. The little girl swallows hard. Her lips tremble. She tries to speak, but her voice cracks before a single word escapes. She lifts her hands toward the keys again, her palms damp with fear. The piano seems impossibly large, a mountain she cannot climb. A quiet whimper escapes her before she can hide it. Miss Darrow's eyes narrow. Really now, if you can't manage a simple melody, maybe you should consider another hobby. A soft ripple of discomfort moves through the audience. Even children who had been smirking earlier now shift guiltily in their seats. Something feels wrong. Too harsh. Too deliberate. The girl's shoulders fold inward as though she could make herself disappear. Her chin trembles. Her sweater hangs off her like it is too heavy for her small frame. Keanu inhales deeply, not loudly, but with the weighted breath of someone holding back emotion. He takes one more step forward almost instinctively, as if his body is moving before his mind decides. He does not want to interfere, not yet. But he cannot look away. Not when he recognizes the exact look in the girl's eyes, that look of someone holding on to the last string of their courage. The teacher presses again, her voice sharp. Play something, anything. Since you insist you belong at this piano. The girl squeezes her eyes shut. Her hands hover above the keys. Her feet barely touch the pedals. Every part of her is shaking. And then she hears it. A soft voice from the back of the room, quiet enough that only she catches it. Breathe. You're not alone. Her eyes open slightly. She looks toward the back. She doesn't recognize the man standing there. She has no idea who he is, but something in his voice cuts through her panic like a warm hand through cold air. Keanu's gaze meets hers, not demanding, not pushing, just steady, present. It is enough to anchor her for a heartbeat, just one. Something shifts inside the girl as she holds Keanu's gaze. The panic in her chest loosens just enough for her to breathe again. Her trembling slows not completely, but enough for her fingers to hover with intention rather than fear. The room is silent, waiting for collapse, unaware that something else is beginning. Ms. Darrow crosses her arms, impatient and irritated. She expects humiliation to follow. She expects the girl to crumble. She does not notice the quiet strength rising in the child's eyes, lit by a stranger's kindness. The girl lowers her hands to the keys. She has not played a real piano in months. Her heart pounds so loudly she can hear it echoing through her ribs. But she remembers her mother's hands guiding hers. She remembers warmth. She remembers music. Just as she presses the first key, the video freezes. The entire moment suspended in a single breath. The screen fades to black. A single line appears. You won't believe what happened next. And with that, the story begins. What no one knew was that this moment would spark a journey of truth, courage, and unexpected redemption for a child who only needed someone to truly see. The morning after the video's opening moment, the community center in East Los Angeles looked like it always did. The walls were bright, with murals painted by neighborhood kids. The air carried a mixture of old carpet tempera paint and the warm smell of after-school snacks. Parents hurried through the doors after long shifts, and children moved between rooms in bursts of chatter and restless energy. In the middle of it all, Keanu Reeves moved quietly, almost deliberately invisible, the way he preferred it here. He carried 2 boxes of donated books down the hall, greeting staff members with a nod and a soft smile. Most of the kids didn't know who he really was, and the adults who did respected the boundary he'd set. Here, he wasn't the movie star. He wasn't John Wick or Neo or anyone else the world expected him to be. He was just Keanu, the guy who fixed broken chairs, swept the gym floor, tuned old guitars, and sat with shy kids who didn't know where they fit in. He liked it that way. These were kids who needed quiet spaces, kids who needed gentle voices, kids who needed someone who wasn't trying to impress them or judge them. As he passed the art room, he paused. Children were rinsing brushes in plastic sinks. A volunteer struggled to open a stuck window. Keanu stepped in, tugged it loose with calm strength, and offered a small thumbs up before slipping out. The volunteers thanked him, and he nodded again, his simple rhythm of service continuing. His next stop was the music room, a multi-purpose space with linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that hummed a little too loudly. Against the far wall stood the upright piano. It wasn't much to look at. Its wood was scratched. Its legs were uneven. The ivory on several keys had chipped away over the years. But whenever he passed it, Keanu felt something familiar in its worn edges. He used to stare at instruments that looked like that, used to wonder if anyone would ever let him touch one, used to imagine the sounds he could make if he only had the chance. He set the boxes down on a chair and began collecting loose sheet music scattered across the room. As he worked, the door opened quietly and a small figure stepped inside. She was tiny, too tiny for her oversized backpack, faded jeans, and soft pink sweater that had been washed enough times to lose its color. Her hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. A few strands fell around her face like she didn't have time that morning to fix it. Her sneakers were worn so thin they barely kept their shape. She didn't step fully into the room. She hovered near the door, shoulders curved inward, as if trying to shrink into the frame. Keanu glanced up and offered a gentle smile. "Hi there." She startled, offering only a shy nod in return. Emma called a voice behind her. Ms. Darrow appeared from the hallway with a clipboard in hand. She wore a blazer too stiff for an after-school program and heels that clicked through the building with a rhythm that made kids sit straighter, sometimes out of fear rather than respect. "You can sit over there while we get started." Emma nodded quickly and shuffled to a chair near the wall. She kept her backpack clutched to her chest, her eyes drifting everywhere except toward people. But then something caught her attention. The piano. Her chin lifted an inch, her eyes fixed on the chipped ivory keys. Her grip on her backpack loosened without her noticing. And Keanu saw it. He recognized that look the way someone recognizes their own reflection. A child remembering something lost. Emma did not move from her chair, but something in her posture changed the moment her eyes settled on the piano. Her shoulders eased forward and her knees relaxed. It was as if a quiet current pulled her attention across the room, something only she could feel. Her fingers slipped from the straps of her backpack and hovered in her lap, twitching with tiny movements, almost like she was remembering shapes only her hands understood. Keanu watched her from where he stood near the sheet music shelf. He didn't stare, didn't make it obvious. He simply observed the small shifts in her expression, the soft widening of her eyes, the way her breathing slowed when she looked at the keyboard. The smallest spark of longing flickered across her face, so gentle someone else might have missed it entirely. But Keanu didn't miss it, because he remembered being young and poor, standing in front of instruments he couldn't afford to touch. He remembered feeling like the world held certain doors closed, and no matter how much you loved something, it didn't mean you were allowed near it. Ms. Darrow, on the other hand, didn't seem capable of seeing any of this. She was flipping through papers at her desk, muttering to herself as she arranged the afternoon roster. Without looking up, she said in a clipped voice, "Emma, please stay seated. We have limited time today." Emma pulled her hands into her lap and nodded quickly, even though the teacher wasn't looking. She shrank back into her chair. The longing in her eyes dimmed, replaced by that familiar guarded expression children wear when they've learned the world isn't always safe. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He knelt beside the stack of sheet music, sorting them slowly while keeping Emma in his peripheral vision. He didn't know her story yet, but he didn't need the full picture to understand the shape of her silence. She reminded him of too many kids he had met in places where the world moved too fast and cared too little. Kids who carried grief quietly, kids who hid their talents because nobody believed they had any. A group of energetic students burst into the music room, laughter spilling ahead of them. They gathered around the front of the class, chatting about the pieces they hoped to play. Their instruments gleamed with newness. Their clothes were clean, their confidence bright. They barely noticed Emma in the corner. One of the boys slowed as he passed her, giving her a quick look before whispering something to his friend. They both snickered under their breath. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Keanu's jaw tightened just slightly. Ms. Darrow clapped her hands sharply. "Let's begin. Today we will warm up before we rotate through solos. If you know your scales, prove it." The confident students smiled proudly. They knew this routine. They had practiced for it. They were ready to shine. Emma stayed perfectly still. She didn't open her backpack. She didn't prepare anything. She didn't move her feet. Her eyes flickered toward the piano one last time before she forced herself to look away. A shadow passed across Keanu's expression. He could see the truth in that glance. She wanted to play. She desperately wanted to play, but she didn't believe she deserved to. He stood wiping his hands on his jeans as though brushing off dust that wasn't really there. His footsteps were quiet as he moved toward the piano, pretending to check its bench height. He made small adjustments, tapping a few keys lightly to hear how far out of tune it was. The sound made Emma lift her head. Keanu caught her eye by accident, not with a stare, just a simple moment of recognition. She looked away just as quickly, cheeks flush with embarrassment. Keanu respected her space and returned to the corner, but he kept the image in his mind, a girl whose eyes lit up at a piano, but dimmed at herself. He knew that look. He had lived it. When warm-ups ended, Ms. Darrow walked past Emma without so much as a glance. She announced the afternoon pairings and listed every student, except the quiet girl in the corner. Emma lowered her head, accepting it without protest, her fingers curling tightly into her sleeves. Keanu noticed. He carried a stack of music stands to the back of the room, passing by her chair without making it obvious. But when he paused to adjust a crooked stand, he saw her watching the piano again. Not with hope, but with a kind of quiet ache, like someone remembering a place they could never return to. In that moment, he understood more than her silence. He sensed loss, the kind that pulls children into themselves and teaches them not to ask for anything. As Ms. Darrow called her favorites forward, Emma sat alone. Keanu watched her, knowing this was only the beginning of her story. When the after-school session ended, children spilled out of the community center in loud waves, laughing and shouting as they ran toward waiting cars or groups of friends. The sun was slowly sinking, washing the neighborhood in a soft golden haze that made the cracked sidewalks look warmer than they really were. Most of the kids didn't notice Emma leaving. She slipped out quietly, holding her backpack close to her chest like a small shield. She walked with careful steps, as if trying not to take up too much space on the path. A cluster of wealthier families gathered near the parking lot, greeting their children with wide smiles and open arms. Mothers hugged kids who returned from piano lessons. Fathers loaded expensive violins and polished cellos into SUVs. The sound of cheerful conversations floated through the air. Emma kept her head down and continued past them. No one greeted her. No one waved. No one asked how her day was. The world around her seemed full of warmth, meant for other children, children whose lives moved forward with structure and stability. Emma had learned long ago not to resent them. She didn't know their stories. She only knew hers. and hers felt small in moments like this. The street grew quieter as she walked farther from the cluster of families. Her apartment was almost a mile away, past a row of neat houses, then a line of small duplexes, and finally a set of aging buildings with peeling paint and narrow hallways. She had memorized every crack in the sidewalk, every fence post, every tree root pushing through the concrete. The wind grew sharper. She pulled her sweater tighter around her and quickened her pace. A car zoomed past, blasting music loud enough to rattle the windows of nearby homes. Emma didn't react. She was used to noise. She was used to everything. Behind her, the familiar soft rhythm of a bicycle approached. She didn't look back until she heard a gentle voice call out, "Emma." She turned startled. Keanu slowed his bike to match her pace. He had a messenger bag slung over his shoulder and a hint of paint on his sleeve from helping the art room earlier. His hair blew slightly with the breeze as he stopped beside her, resting one foot on the ground. "Hey," he said softly. "Long walk home." She gave a small nod. She didn't look at him fully, but she didn't retreat either. That was something. "It's getting colder than the weather forecast predicted," he said, glancing at her thin sweater. "You warm enough?" Another small nod, though the slight shiver in her shoulders betrayed her. He did not push. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply reached into his bag and pulled out a dark knit beanie, one he had worn earlier that week when the temperature dipped. He held it out to her without a flourish. "Here," he said. "Take this. You can give it back tomorrow, no rush." Emma blinked. Her hands tightened around her backpack straps. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse out of habit, the way children do when they're used to expecting nothing. But the wind brushed her cheek again, and the cold stung just slightly. She reached out, touched the beanie, and hesitated again. "It's clean," he added gently, as if reading her anxiety. "And warm. It'll help." She took it with both hands. Not quickly, not carelessly. She held it like it was something fragile or rare. Then she slipped it onto her head, tugging it down over her ears. The warmth was immediate, and her shoulders relaxed an inch. "Thank you," she whispered so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Keanu smiled. "Anytime." He didn't cycle away right away. He stayed beside her for a moment longer, making sure she was okay, but never crowding her space. Eventually he nodded and began biking slowly ahead, glancing back just once to make sure she was following the sidewalk safely. Emma watched him go, not understanding yet why his kindness felt so different from the attention she usually tried to avoid. She continued walking, the beanie warm on her head, and for the first time in days, the cold didn't hurt quite as much. By the time Emma reached her apartment building, the sky had shifted from gold to a hazy blue-gray. The three-story complex stood quietly at the end of the block, its walls faded from years of weather, and its stair railings chipped from 1,000 hands. A couple argued on a balcony 2 floors up. A dog barked from somewhere behind the laundry room. A grocery cart lay abandoned near the entrance. None of it startled her. This was the world she had grown used to. She climbed the stairs with slow, familiar steps. The beanie kept her warm, though her fingers were still cold as she unlocked the apartment door. The hinges gave their usual soft creak. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and reheated dinners. The lights were off, but a small lamp near the kitchen counter glowed with a comforting yellow. Her father always left it on, so she wouldn't come home to darkness. A folded note sat beside the lamp, pinned under a plastic fork. "Working late. Left dinner in the fridge." "Love you, Peanut." Her father's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, rushed but gentle. Emma traced one letter with her finger before setting the note carefully back on the counter. She wasn't surprised. He had been working every shift he could find since they moved to this neighborhood. Evening shifts, early mornings, weekend work, anything to keep them afloat. She opened the fridge and found a container of pasta. She warmed it in the microwave and ate quietly at the small table by the window. The apartment was only 1 bedroom, so Emma slept in the living room on a pull-out bed. Her father insisted she take the bedroom, but she refused. She knew he slept poorly on the couch already. She didn't want him to sleep even worse on the pullout. As she ate, her fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop, soft, rhythmic movements, patterns only she understood. Her hand curved just slightly, shaping invisible melodies. Even when she wasn't thinking about it, her hands remembered. After dinner, she washed her dish and dried it with a towel that had tiny cherries stitched along the border. She placed it back in the cupboard with care. Then she walked to the living room and pulled her backpack onto the couch. She unzipped it slowly, almost ceremonially, as though preparing for something sacred. Inside was a stack of homework, a few coloring pencils worn short, and one object she handled with a kind of reverence. A folded sheet of heavy paper taped to 2 pieces of cardboard to keep it from bending. She placed it on the coffee table carefully. Then she sat in front of it, tucked her legs under her, and smoothed the surface with both hands. It wasn't just paper. It was a keyboard, a full 88-key piano layout hand-drawn by her father. He had measured each key, precisely marking the black keys with thick marker and the white keys with pencil. The paper had wrinkles where her fingers had pressed too hard. Some lines had faded, but the outline remained. It always remained. Her father had given it to her a year ago when the Dr. Bills forced them to sell their real piano. He had told her she could practice on this until he could save enough to buy her another. She never believed the second part, but she practiced anyway. With silent discipline, Emma placed her hands over the drawn keys. Her posture straightened. Her fingers curved with instinct. Her thumbs hovered above middle C. She closed her eyes. Then she played. Not with sound, not with real instruments, but with memory. Her fingers moved across the paper, dancing from one section to another with grace no one outside these walls ever saw. Her wrists rose and fell with the flow of invisible melodies. Her shoulders moved to rhythms she kept in her mind. Here, in this tiny living room, the world fell away. Here, she remembered her mother's voice guiding her. Here, she felt whole. She played the entire piece twice before stopping. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were damp, but her breathing was steady. She folded the paper keyboard gently and slid it back into her backpack. She placed the beanie Keanu gave her beside her pillow, knowing she would wear it again in the morning. Outside, the neighborhood noises continued. Cars rumbled, voices echoed. A siren wailed in the distance. But inside, Emma felt warm, almost safe, almost seen. Emma lay down quietly, clutching the beanie. Tomorrow would be another hard day, but for the first time, she felt a little hope. The next afternoon, the community center buzzed with the usual activity. Children rushed in carrying backpacks and after-school snacks. A few parents checked their phones while volunteers ushered kids toward their assigned rooms. The music room tucked at the end of a hallway, lined with faded posters filled with warm chatter as students arrived eager to show off their latest pieces. Emma slipped quietly through the doorway. She chose the same seat in the far corner, placing her backpack on her lap, like a barrier. Her sweater sleeves were pulled over her hands, and she kept her gaze low. She didn't speak to anyone. No one spoke to her. Ms. Darrow stood near the front, wearing her usual fitted blazer and a smile too polished to be warm. Her hair was pinned back tightly, not a strand out of place. She held a clipboard close to her chest, tapping a pen rhythmically as she reviewed her notes. Her eyes flicked over her students like a general surveying her troops. When she looked at her favorites, her face softened. When she glanced past the others, her expression hardened into indifference. "Let's begin," she said crisply. "We have a lot to accomplish today. I expect full focus." She started by calling up her top students. One by one, confident children rose from their seats to demonstrate scales, arpeggios, and small excerpts from classical pieces. Their instruments gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Some carried custom cases. Others had brand new sheet music printed on expensive paper. When they finished, Miss Darrow praised them loudly and enthusiastically, as if each performance was a revelation. "Excellent phrasing, Timothy. Wonderful control, Brielle. I can see your private lessons are paying off." The favored students smiled broadly. Their pride was obvious. They soaked in every compliment like it was sunlight. But when students outside her circle faltered even slightly, her tone shifted. She didn't guide them. She didn't encourage them. She brushed past them with a sigh or an impatient comment. "Try again. Sloppy. That rhythm should be obvious by now." Her voice never rose, but the disdain beneath it was unmistakable. Emma sat still, hands clasped tightly, watching it all unfold. She knew she wouldn't be called on. She had not been since her first day, and part of her was grateful. The idea of standing at the front of the room made her stomach twist. But another part of her, the part that remembered playing beside her mother on warm Saturday mornings, felt something like loss. She looked up at the piano only once, just once. It happened in a moment when Ms. Darrow was praising a student. Emma's eyes drifted toward the chipped ivory keys like they were calling her name. It wasn't something she meant to do. It wasn't bold or intentional. It was instinct, the kind of instinct that still lived inside her even after a year of silence. But Ms. Darrow noticed. The teacher's sharp eyes flicked toward the back row. She caught that tiny flicker of longing in Emma's expression. The corner of her mouth curled upward, not kindly but knowingly. "Ah," she murmured. "So that's it." Emma quickly looked away, cheeks warming with embarrassment. Keanu, who was sweeping near the storage closet in the back of the room, paused his motions. He was close enough to hear the shift in the teacher's tone, close enough to see Emma shrinking back into herself. But he stayed quiet. He knew children like her. If he stepped in too soon, he could pull unwanted attention onto her shoulders. She needed room to keep her emotion protected, and he respected that. But he watched. Always watched. Ms. Darrow tapped her pen against her clipboard again, her eyes lingering on Emma longer than before. Something calculating passed over her expression. A small thought, a seed of an idea. And when she finally turned back to her favored students, that small curl in her lips had grown sharper. She had noticed something in Emma, and she intended to use it. As the class moved into its group exercises, the atmosphere shifted from eager performance to structured routine. Students clapped simple rhythms, repeated melodic patterns, and practiced sight reading from worksheets. Most participated with confidence, raising their hands often and loudly. Emma followed along quietly at her seat, barely making a sound when she clapped, hardly moving her lips during vocal warm-ups. It wasn't that she didn't know the answers. She simply made herself small, blending into the back row as if invisible were the safest place to be. Ms. Darrow circulated between the rows, offering guidance only when she believed it would enhance her image. She corrected postures, adjusted bow grips, and made pointed remarks about hand position. When she reached Timothy, she crouched beside him with an exaggerated air of encouragement, telling the entire class to observe real technique. When she passed Emma's row, she didn't even turn her head. The difference was impossible to ignore. Keanu, stacking chairs toward the back wall, noticed the pattern immediately. He watched Emma glance at her worksheet with clear understanding, but keep her hand down every time a question was asked. Her posture wasn't lazy. It was cautious, measured, as though any attention might bring a storm she couldn't handle. And then it happened again. During a short break between exercises, the students were allowed a few minutes to stretch or chat. As the noise picked up, Emma's eyes drifted toward the piano once more, softly, carefully, the way someone studies something precious from afar. Her fingers twitched in her lap. Ms. Darrow spotted the movement instantly, her expression stilled, freezing into a look of cool satisfaction, as though she had finally identified something she'd been searching for. She walked over to the piano, straightened the bench deliberately, and tapped its edge with a single manicured finger. She turned her head just slightly to see if Emma was watching. She was. And Emma realized too late that she had been caught. A flash of panic crossed her face. She quickly lowered her gaze, but the damage was done. Ms. Darrow's smirk deepened, the kind of smile that grows when someone with authority sees an opportunity to assert power. "Very interesting," Ms. Darrow murmured under her breath. Keanu's broom paused in mid-sweep. He had heard the tone perfectly. It wasn't curiosity, it was condescension laced with something more dangerous. The tone of someone planning something they believed would teach a child a lesson. He watched as Ms. Darrow scribbled something onto her clipboard, her pen pressing harder than before. Then she walked briskly to the front of the room and clapped her hands again. "Break's over. Instruments away. Let's move on to our demonstration round." The favored students lit up instantly, some exchanging excited glances. This was their chance to shine again. Their moment to earn more of the teacher's praise. Emma sank deeper into her chair, but today was different. Today, Miss Darrow's gaze kept returning to her. The teacher scanned the room slowly, letting the suspense build. Then her eyes stopped on Emma's corner. She tilted her head slightly, studying the small, silent girl who had done everything possible to be unseen. Emma blinked quickly, bracing herself. "Oh, don't worry," Miss Darrow said smoothly, almost sweetly. "We'll be doing things a bit differently today." The room quieted. Some students straightened. Others seemed confused. Only Keanu recognized the tension beneath the teacher's smile. She was planning something, and Emma was at the center of it. Ms. Darrow closed her clipboard with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. All eyes turned to her as she stepped toward the center of the room with a sense of purpose that made even the confident students sit a little straighter. "Starting tomorrow," she announced, "we will introduce a new rotation. Every student will be required to perform something at the piano. No exceptions." A few kids murmured excitedly, others groaned. Emma froze. Ms. Darrow's gaze drifted deliberately toward the back row, landing on the small girl trying her hardest not to be noticed. Her smile widened just enough to reveal that this rule had nothing to do with fairness or growth or music education. It was about control, and she wanted to make sure Emma felt it. Emma swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She nodded instinctively, even though no one had asked her a question. Keanu watched from the corner, his expression tightening with quiet concern. He knew exactly what had happened. He had seen teachers like this before, the ones who used authority to spotlight the child least able to defend themselves. Ms. Darrow had crafted her plan. Emma would be the lesson. The community center emptied slowly after music hour. The louder, confident children rushed toward the courtyard, comparing scales and laughing about who would get a solo at the spring showcase. Their parents waited outside with warm jackets and quick embraces. The room brightened as they left. Then it dimmed again. Emma stayed behind, pretending to reorganize her backpack so no one would see her hesitate near the piano. She waited until the last cluster of students drifted out of the doorway, and only then did she move. Her steps were small, careful, like approaching something sacred. She reached the bench. Her hand hovered over it for a moment before she let her fingers touch the worn wood. Not sit, not play, just touch. A soft brush of fingertips across the curved seat, almost a silent greeting, almost a memory. Keanu watched from the back of the room, quiet as always, leaning over a cabinet he had been fixing. His toolbox sat open on the floor beside him. He had been tightening screws and replacing a loose hinge, but the soft way Emma touched that bench stopped him mid-motion. He recognized that gesture. He had done the same thing when he was young, brushing his hand across an instrument like it contained some piece of a dream he wasn't sure he deserved to hold. He remembered a dusty second-hand shop where he used to visit an old guitar he couldn't afford. He remembered running his fingers along the strings without plucking them, afraid the owner might ask him to leave. Afraid the dream might disappear. Emma's touch held that same longing, a weight that had nothing to do with talent, and everything to do with loss. Keanu stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. He didn't want to startle her, so he cleared his throat gently before speaking. "You like the piano, right?" Emma froze. Her hand slipped away from the bench so fast it was like she had been caught touching something forbidden. She clutched her backpack straps and stared at the floor. "I was just looking." Her voice was so soft it barely registered. Keanu offered a small smile, one she didn't see because her eyes were glued to her shoes. Music is meant to be looked at and listened to and felt. She stayed rigid. He shifted his stance so he wasn't blocking her exit. He wanted to make the moment gentle, not heavy. Sometimes kids just needed space to breathe. Do you play? Emma's shoulders tensed. She opened her mouth, closed. It tried again. I used to. Those two words carried an entire story. One he could feel even without hearing it. Used to, Keanu repeated softly. That can mean a lot of things. Used to because you moved. Used to because you got busy. Used to because something happened. She looked up at him for the first time, her eyes wide and cautious. She didn't answer, but he didn't need her to. He nodded slowly. It's okay. You don't have to explain anything you don't want to. Her shoulders loosened a little. For the first time, she didn't look like she was waiting for someone to laugh at her. Keanu stepped back a bit, just enough to let the air settle. He nodded toward the bench she had touched. It's a good instrument, even with the chipped keys. Emma's gaze flicked toward the piano again, soft and afraid. Yeah, it's really nice. Keanu saw it again. That longing, that grief wrapped inside desire, that quiet memory she was carrying alone. And he knew this wasn't just about liking music. It was about missing someone who once taught her to play, someone she didn't have anymore. He felt the truth of it settle in his chest. Keanu gently rested a hand on the side of the piano, keeping a respectful distance so Emma would not feel cornered. The room was nearly silent, except for the faint hum of the old fluorescent light overhead. Emma shifted her weight, her fingers nervously tapping the zipper of her backpack. You know, he said softly, I wasn't always good at music either. Emma blinked up at him, confused. Everyone knew who he was. Even though he didn't flaunt it, even though he dressed like any other volunteer, the older kids whispered sometimes. The younger ones just liked him because he fixed broken things and tied loose shoelaces. But to Emma, he was the quiet man who always swept the floor when nobody asked him to. You play guitar, she murmured. Well, I try. He smiled. But when I first started, I didn't even have one. Not a real one. This surprised her. Her eyebrows lifted just enough to show curiosity, a rare spark in a face that had learned to stay small. What did you practice on? She asked. Keanu let out a small laugh, warm and self-deprecating. A plank of wood my neighbor cut for me. It was shaped like a guitar, sort of. No strings, just pencil marks where the frets should be. Emma's eyes widened. That's kind of funny. It is, he admitted. But I learned a lot from that piece of wood. Learned patience, learned rhythm, learned how much I wanted to play even before I could make a sound. Emma hesitated, then whispered, I practice on paper. Keanu didn't react with shock or pity. He inhaled slowly, letting the truth settle. It made sense now. The careful movements he saw her do during class, the way her fingers curled in midair as if playing invisible notes, the quiet focus that didn't fit a child who supposedly had no talent. Paper, he said gently. That takes dedication. She shook her head. It's not real. He crouched slightly so he could meet her eyes without towering over her. Paper or not, real musicians play with their heart first. Emma's lips parted slightly. It wasn't a smile yet, but it was something close, something hopeful. A tiny spark against the loneliness pressed around her for so long. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers slowly as if rediscovering them. Do you really think so? She whispered. I know so, Keanu said. And in that quiet room, for the first time since she arrived in this neighborhood, Emma's face softened. A small, trembling smile appeared. Emma held that small smile for only a moment before her shoulders folded inward again, as if she remembered she wasn't supposed to hope for too much. She stepped back from the piano and wrapped her arms around herself, rubbing her sleeves like she was trying to disappear into the fabric. Keanu didn't push. He stayed exactly where he was, giving her space. The last thing he ever wanted was to overwhelm a child who already carried too much. You know, he said softly, when I was your age, I thought the world was too big for me. Too loud, too fast. I felt like I had to stay out of the way, stay small. Emma's eyes lifted again. But you didn't stay small. Maybe not, but it took people being kind, people who noticed when I didn't think they were looking. Emma stared at him for a long moment, Then her eyes flicked to the piano again, almost involuntarily. It was the gentlest longing, the kind that came from remembering something precious rather than wanting attention. "Do you miss it?" Keanu asked quietly. She swallowed. "Maybe. Sometimes." "You looked at the piano today the way someone looks at home," he said. "Not a place, but a feeling." Emma blinked quickly. Once, twice. Her jaw tightened as she tried to keep her expression steady. "My mom used to play," she whispered, "and teach me. But everything changed after." Keanu's heart tightened, but he didn't react outwardly. He didn't touch her shoulder. He didn't kneel. He just stayed with her, steady and calm, like a quiet shelter in the dim room. "That's a lot for someone your age," he said gently. Emma did not answer. She didn't need to. Keanu waited. Silence had always been one of his best tools when it came to children who carried grief. It allowed them to speak on their own terms. After a long moment, she whispered, "I don't tell anyone. They wouldn't believe me. And if they did, they'd think I was bragging. Or weird." Keanu nodded slowly, not because he agreed, but because he understood that she believed it. Then he offered her a gentle truth. "You don't have to tell everyone, but you don't have to hide from yourself either." Emma's throat bobbed. She looked toward the doorway as voices from the hallway drifted in, signaling the end of after-school programs. "I should go," she murmured. Keanu stepped aside so she had a clear path, but as she walked past him, he said softly, "You can sit at the piano anytime you want, even if it's just to look at it." Emma paused, just for a second. Then she nodded, clutching her bag tighter as she walked out the door. And Keanu knew one thing for certain. That small spark in her eyes wasn't going away. It was growing. The next afternoon at the community center felt different from the day before. The air in the music room carried a strange heaviness, like a storm waiting to break. Students arrived laughing and chatting, but their voices softened the moment they stepped inside. Something about the way Miss Darrow stood near the piano made everyone instinctively wary. She held her clipboard close to her chest, tapping a pen against it in sharp, irritated clicks. Her expression was too controlled, too polished. She scanned the room with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When her gaze briefly passed over Keanu, who was sweeping the hallway just outside the door, her jaw tightened. She had noticed yesterday. She had seen him talking to Emma after class. She had watched the way the quiet volunteer, the one who everyone liked without fully understanding why, had crouched beside the girl and spoken to her in a tone that wasn't dismissive or hurried. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. He was a volunteer. She was the instructor. This was her domain, and she planned to make sure everyone remembered it. As the children settled into their seats, Emma took her usual spot in the back row. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her bag clutched in her lap. When she glanced at the piano, it wasn't with longing this time. It was with fear. Ms. Darrow cleared her throat. The room fell silent. "All right, everyone. We will be doing something different today," she announced. Her voice carried an air of cheerfulness that felt like painted-on sunshine. "I have decided that this week we will begin our performance evaluations." Several children exchanged confused looks. "Performance evaluations?" one boy asked. "Yes." Ms. Darrow smiled tightly. "A surprise test of sorts. Every student will play something at the piano." Emma's breath caught. She stared down at her knees, her fingers twisting together desperately. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Those who have been taking lessons will use the pieces they have practiced. And for those who have not taken lessons, well, this will be an excellent opportunity to understand expectations. She added pointedly, her eyes landing directly on Emma. Keanu, standing by the doorway with a broom in hand, paused mid-sweep. His eyes shifted from Ms. Darrow to Emma with slow, quiet concern. He didn't move. He didn't intervene. But something in his posture changed, as if the muscles in his arms tightened without him willing them to. He had seen enough over the years to recognize when a child was being singled out. The room buzzed with whispers. A few of the advanced students looked excited. They thrived on structured praise. Others looked nervous but willing to try. Only Emma seemed frozen. Her face had gone pale, almost gray. She tried to hide it by pulling her sleeves down over her hands, but Keanu saw the tremble in her fingers. He had known this moment was coming ever since Ms. Darrow first smirked at her 2 days ago. He had hoped he was imagining it. He wasn't. "All right, class, we will begin tomorrow afternoon," Ms. Darrow continued briskly. "Today will be your preparation day. Use your time wisely." Her favored students opened their folders immediately, confident and ready. Their parents paid for lessons every week. They had played in recitals. They knew exactly how to shine. Emma stared at the empty top of her desk. No music sheets, no notes, no piano at home, no mother, and now, no escape. Keanu leaned the broom against the wall, keeping his expression calm, even as unease twisted inside him. He had seen cruelty delivered quietly before, wrapped in rules and disguised as opportunities. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew something he had learned the hard way. People show you who they are in the moments they think no one will help them. Emma was about to have one of those moments, and Keanu would be there watching closely. The rest of the afternoon unfolded under a tense silence. Students practiced simple melodies at their desks, tapping rhythms with pencils or whispering fingering patterns under their breath. Even the confident ones looked unusually focused, sensing the pressure of tomorrow's performance. Emma didn't move. Her hands stayed in her lap, fingers curled tightly, knuckles pale. She stared at the grain of the wooden desk as if it could swallow her whole. Every so often her eyes drifted involuntarily toward the piano, then darted away as if the sight burned. Keanu kept himself busy stacking chairs on the other side of the half-open door, but his attention stayed fixed on her. He watched the way her shoulders shook when she breathed too deeply. He watched the way she tried to steady her hands by pressing them flat against her knees. He watched because no one else did. Ms. Darrow floated around the room like a queen inspecting her court. She stopped beside each of her favored students, correcting posture, offering gentle praise, touching a shoulder here, smiling there. When she reached Emma's row, she did not slow down. She didn't even turn her head. She breezed past as if the girl didn't exist. Emma flinched anyway. A few minutes later, one of the boys dropped his sheet music. It scattered across the floor in a messy burst. Ms. Darrow stooped quickly to help him, offering reassurance and tapping each page into perfect order. Emma watched with a longing so sharp it almost hurt to see. She wasn't jealous of the praise. She was starving for belonging. When class ended, students gathered their things and hurried out, buzzing with talk of what they would play. Emma stayed seated until the room nearly emptied. She didn't want to draw attention by being first or last, but she needed time to pull herself together. Keanu stepped back as she passed through the doorway, offering the slightest, gentlest smile. She lifted her eyes for half a second, enough to acknowledge him, then looked down again. "Be safe going home," he said quietly. She nodded, clutching her bag to her chest as if it were armor. Behind them, Ms. Darrow stood at her desk, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Something cold flickered across her expression. She didn't like interference. She didn't like unpredictability, and she especially didn't like the idea of anyone noticing the one student she had decided would never shine. Her plan was set. Tomorrow she intended to make sure Emma stayed exactly where she believed the girl belonged. Emma stepped into the hallway, her shoes making almost no sound on the worn linoleum. The other kids rushed past her, laughing and pushing each other playfully, their voices echoing off the lockers. She hugged her backpack tighter, shrinking herself as she moved toward the exit. She didn't want to bump into anyone. She didn't want anyone to notice her shaking. Keanu followed a few paces behind, not close enough to make her uncomfortable, but close enough to ensure she made it out safely. He had learned long ago that kids like Emma often walked through the world feeling completely alone, even in crowded rooms. Outside, the early evening air carried a slight chill. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk as the sun dipped lower behind the city buildings. Emma hesitated at the foot of the steps, as if the weight of tomorrow pressed down so heavily she couldn't quite force herself forward. "You all right?" Keanu asked in a soft voice. Emma nodded, though her eyes stayed locked on the ground. Her small fingers clutched the frayed strap of her bag until her knuckles whitened. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't promise things would be easy. He simply offered presence, the kind that steadied rather than smothered. "Tomorrow is just a moment," he said quietly. "Not your whole story." Emma blinked. The words seemed to settle somewhere deep, but fear still hovered in her expression. She walked away slowly, her steps small and careful, like she was afraid the sidewalk might crumble beneath her. Keanu watched her until she rounded the corner. Only then did he let out a slow exhale, rubbing the back of his neck as unease twisted inside him. He had seen kids break under pressure like this. He had seen the way one cruel moment could follow them for years. Behind him, the music room lights flicked off. Ms. Darrow locked the door with a sharp twist of her wrist. When she turned, she caught sight of him, watching her. "Is there something you'd like to say, Mr. Reeves?" she asked coolly. Keanu met her stare with calm steadiness. "No, not yet." Her mouth tightened before she walked past him, heels clicking with brisk authority. Keanu remained on the steps long after she disappeared. He gazed toward the street where Emma had gone, his thoughts heavy. He wished he could shield her from what was coming, but something told him tomorrow would reveal far more than weakness or fear. It would show truth, hers, Ms. Darrow's, and maybe even his own. He just hoped Emma would survive the moment long enough to discover what she was capable of. The next day arrived far too quickly for Emma. She barely slept the night before, lying awake in her tiny apartment with the paper keyboard spread across the table beside her. She practiced the motions again and again, but nothing calmed the storm in her chest. When morning came, she felt hollow, like her fear had eaten through everything inside her. By the time she reached the community center that afternoon, the hallways were buzzing with nervous excitement. Students lined up outside the music room, clutching sheet music and humming softly to themselves. Some whispered last-minute reminders to their friends. Others bounced anxiously on their heels. Emma stood at the back of the line, her hands shoved deep into her pockets so no one would see them shaking. Inside the room, sunlight streamed across the piano, reflecting off its glossy surface, like a spotlight waiting for its next target. Ms. Darrow stood beside it with her clipboard, her smile thin and sharp. The moment she saw Emma step through the doorway, something triumphant flickered in her eyes. Keanu stood in the corner near the supply cabinet, helping stack music folders. He lifted his head as Emma entered and offered her a quiet nod. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice, but Emma felt it. A small anchor in a room that otherwise made her want to run. "All right, class," Ms. Darrow announced once everyone was seated. "Today is the first day of performance evaluations. I expect your full attention, your best effort, and your respect for those who perform." She stepped forward dramatically, as if preparing for a grand show. "We will begin with Emma." Emma's stomach lurched. A few students turned in their seats, surprised. Some looked confused. Others looked relieved it wasn't them. Emma didn't move at first. She couldn't. Her feet felt glued to the floor. Ms. Darrow tapped her clipboard impatiently. "Emma, please come to the piano." Emma swallowed, but her throat felt too tight. She whispered, I can't. I'm not." "Oh," Ms. Darrow raised her eyebrows. "Are you saying you refuse?" That would be highly inappropriate for a student receiving free instruction at this center. A few kids whispered nervously. Emma's face flushed hot. I don't know anything to play," she murmured so quietly it was almost soundless. Ms. Darrow crossed her arms with exaggerated pity. "Of course you do. I saw you tapping your little pretend keyboard yesterday. The one made out of paper, wasn't it?" The words hit Emma like a slap. A couple of students gasped. A few looked down, embarrassed on her behalf. Emma felt exposed, stripped of every last secret she had clung to. Keanu froze mid-step, the folder in his hand, lowering slowly. His jaw tightened just slightly, but he didn't speak. Ms. Darrow continued, smiling sweetly. "Since you practice so diligently on paper, I'm sure you'll have no trouble showing us what you can do on a real instrument." Emma's legs wobbled as she stood. Her whole body felt too light, like she might collapse under the pressure of the room's staring eyes. Step by step, she made her way to the piano bench. The polished wood felt cold beneath her fingers as she steadied herself. "Sit, please," Ms. Darrow directed. Emma lowered herself onto the bench, her feet barely touching the floor. The piano keys seemed impossibly bright, impossibly close. Her hands hovered above them, trembling so violently that she pulled them back into her lap. The room was silent. Then from the very back, Keanu's voice drifted through the tension. "Breathe. The music is still inside you." Emma's breath hitched, and for the first time that day she closed her eyes. Emma kept her eyes closed, trying to steady the shivering in her hands. Her breath came in shallow bursts, like she couldn't draw enough air into her lungs. She could feel everyone watching her, the whispering, the judgment, the pity, the curiosity. It all pressed on her shoulders like a weight she wasn't strong enough to carry. Ms. Darrow stood beside her with folded arms, tapping her heel impatiently. "Whenever you're ready, dear," she said, dripping false kindness. "Though I understand if paper keys feel more comfortable." A few kids winced. Even the ones who didn't like Emma felt the cruelty. Emma's fingers curled tighter in her lap. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run. She wanted to tell Miss Darrow she didn't belong here, that she didn't deserve this piano, or this room, or these eyes on her. But then she remembered Keanu's voice. "Breathe." So she did. A slow, trembling inhale, a shaky exhale. The music is still inside you. Inside. Not on a paper keyboard, not in her mother's lost piano, not in the rooms she could no longer return to. Inside her. She lifted her hands again, but they hovered awkwardly, uncertain. The panic in her chest battled with something quieter, something warmer, a memory of her mother's voice humming beside her, a soft hand guiding her fingers, a laugh when she got the notes right. Emma's breathing slowed. She opened her eyes. The keys no longer looked like threats. They looked like a doorway. Behind her, Keanu stood completely still. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He simply held her in a steady, quiet gaze, grounding her. Emma placed one finger gently on middle C. Her hands still trembled, but now they moved with purpose, not fear. Ms. Darrow's smirk faltered. The room leaned in. Emma closed her eyes one more time, not from fear but from focus, letting the memory of her mother's hands guide her. And in that fragile moment, something shifted in the air, something no one expected. Emma began to play, not loudly, not perfectly, but with a tenderness that silenced every whisper in the room. The first few notes slipped into the room like a whisper. Soft, fragile, almost uncertain. But they were real. And they carried a warmth no one expected from a child who had entered the room looking ready to break. Emma's fingers pressed down again this time with slightly more confidence, shaping a simple melody her mother once taught her. It wasn't a full piece. It wasn't complicated, but it was hers. A memory stitched together from years of practice on paper, from nights spent tracing invisible keys on blankets, from grief that had never fully healed. The sound grew steadier. Ms. Darrow's posture stiffened. This was not the stumbling failure she had prepared for. She stepped closer, as if proximity could regain her control of the moment, but the room wasn't hers anymore. The children watched Emma, not her. Even the chatterboxes in the second row sat frozen in awe. Emma kept going, her small back straightening with each measure. Her trembling slowed, her breathing deepened. She played with the kind of gentle emotion that couldn't be taught in lessons or bought with expensive tutors. Keanu felt his chest tighten as he watched. Not with fear, with recognition. He had seen this before, the moment a child who had been silenced finally remembered she still had a voice. Around the room, faces softened. Even the confident students who normally dominated the space now looked humbled by the quiet miracle happening at the piano. But when Emma reached the end of the simple melody, her courage faltered. Her hands paused above the keys, trembling again, as if the moment of bravery was slipping. "You can keep going," someone whispered. Emma looked up. It wasn't Keanu this time. It was the boy who always sat near the front, the one who usually played violin pieces proudly for the class. He gave her a small nod. "You're doing great," he murmured. Emma blinked, startled. Before she could fully process it, another voice chimed in softly. "You got this." A girl near the window smiled at her, and for the first time since she arrived at the center, Emma felt something new rising inside her. Belonging. She lowered her hands again, steadier now, and played the melody one more time, fuller and clearer than before. The room stayed silent. No one breathed. No one interrupted. Emma wasn't just surviving the moment. She was claiming it. For a moment, the room seemed to hang in midair. Emma's small hands rested on the keys, her fingers curled slightly, her breathing steady at last. The trembling that had shaken her moments ago slowly faded, replaced by a quiet focus that no one in the room had seen before. Even she seemed surprised by the stillness settling inside her. Then something shifted in her expression. A memory surfaced, something soft, something painful, something beautiful. And before anyone could blink, Emma began to play a different melody. It was not the simple tune she had started with. It was deeper, wilder, more delicate. Notes drifted into the air like falling feathers, each one full of warmth and ache. Children leaned forward in their seats. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more quietly, as if unsure they deserved to interrupt. Emma was playing Debussy. Not perfectly, not professionally, but with a purity that made the entire room go silent. Her fingers glided across the keys like water flowing around stones. Her left hand created gentle waves beneath the melody. Her right hand danced lightly above them, weaving tiny bursts of sound that shimmered in the stillness. The shift in the room was immediate and powerful. A girl in the front row put her hands over her mouth. The violin boy sat upright and eyes wide. Even the usual chatterers in the corner stopped fidgeting. Something about the music made the air feel softer, warmer, like someone had opened a window and let a memory drift in. Ms. Darrow, who had been standing rigid with expectation, went pale. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her hand. The tight smirk she had worn earlier dissolved, replaced by an expression that looked dangerously close to fear. This was not the embarrassing stumble she had prepared for. This was a child revealing a truth no one had bothered to ask about. Keanu stood frozen in the back of the room. His eyes glistened, though he blinked the emotion back quietly. It wasn't just the music, it was what it brought back. The memory of his sister Kim sitting beside him years ago, teaching him small melodies on an old keyboard during some of the hardest nights of her illness. Music had been her escape, her comfort, her oxygen. Hearing Emma now felt like hearing Kim again for a single fragile moment. Emma continued to play, her shoulders relaxing as she surrendered to the piece. Every note seemed tied to her mother's memory. The high tones sang like sunlight through a window. The low tones rumbled gently, steady and grounding. With each measure, she grew taller, brighter, more certain. Her small body swayed slightly following the rise and fall of the melody. Her fingers moved independently, forming patterns no one at the center had ever seen a child her age attempt. The entire room became a quiet sea held together by the tide of her playing. A single tear rolled down Keanu's face, though he didn't lift a hand to wipe it. He let it fall. Emma reached the middle section of the piece. It was softer now, almost whispered. Her fingers brushed the keys with tenderness, as if afraid to disturb the memory she was holding. Ms. Darrow swallowed hard. She had never felt smaller, never felt more exposed. This was the moment she realized her plan had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Emma wasn't a nobody. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a child pretending to be something she wasn't. She was a musician. And now the entire room knew it. Emma moved into the final section of the piece with a grace that did not belong to an 8-year-old child. The melody deepened, blooming into a sound that wrapped around every person in the room. It was tender and aching, a quiet conversation between memory and hope. Her fingers no longer hesitated. They flowed with confidence, shaped by countless silent rehearsals on a paper keyboard. The room stayed perfectly still. A boy who normally slouched in his chair sat upright, eyes locked on the piano. A girl who always whispered during lessons leaned forward, with her chin resting on her hands, entranced. Even the younger students who barely understood classical music felt something stirring in their chests, something they didn't have words for. And at the back of the room, Keanu felt his heart pull tight as another wave of emotion washed through him. The way Emma played reminded him so painfully of the way Kim once played during her good days. Soft, brave, fragile. Music had carried her through moments when her body couldn't. She used to tell him that music let her breathe in ways medicine couldn't. Watching Emma now felt like watching that same breath take form again. Emma reached the climax of the piece. Her right hand raced up the keys in a shimmering run. Her left hand supported it with steady, pulsing chords. Her back straightened, her chin lifted. The trembling was gone completely. And then, as gently as a sigh, the music softened. She slowed her hands, letting the notes spread out like ripples on water. Each one lingered just long enough to touch the edges of the room before fading. The final chord landed with a quiet, glowing warmth. Emma held her fingers on the keys for a moment longer, her eyes closed, her expression calm. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't invisible. She was just a girl playing the piece her mother loved keeping, a part of her alive. When her hands finally dropped to her lap, silence settled over the room. A full, breathless silence. Then someone stood. It was the violin boy. He applauded once loudly. The sound echoed like a spark. Then another child stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room rose to their feet. Some clapped with wide-eyed amazement. Others wiped at their cheeks, confused by the tears they didn't expect. A few kids even shouted her name. Emma looked up startled, her eyes filling with disbelief. She had never not once imagined a moment like this. And in the back of the room, Keanu stood quietly, his hands joining the applause, pride shining softly in his eyes. The applause still echoed faintly in the hall when the students began gathering their things. Some rushed up to Emma eager to congratulate her. Others hung back too stunned to speak, but still watching her with admiration. The room that once ignored her now glowed with warm, buzzing energy. Emma didn't know what to do with any of it. She stood beside the piano, her hands clasped together, her eyes darting from face to face. Everything felt too bright, too loud, too sudden. She hadn't expected applause. She hadn't expected people to stand. She hadn't expected anything except surviving the moment and going home. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that someone in the second row had pulled out their phone during the performance. Not to mock her, not to embarrass her. They simply couldn't believe what they were hearing. Their fingers hit record almost instinctively. A single video, 40 seconds long. In those 40 seconds, the world changed. As the students filed out, the staff member with the phone stepped into the hallway, replaying the footage in disbelief. The audio wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Emma's playing shimmered through the tiny speakers like threads of light. The staff member, a college-aged volunteer named Lily, pressed a hand over her mouth. She had never, in all her months working at the center, heard anything like that. Without thinking too much about it, she shared the clip in the community center's internal group chat, adding a brief caption. "Who is this little girl? She's unreal." Within minutes, another staff member shared it with a few parents. Then those parents forwarded it to friends. Someone posted it in a neighborhood Facebook group. Someone else put it on Instagram with the caption, "This child just broke my heart in the most beautiful way." The views climbed fast, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. By the time Emma reached the lobby with her backpack, the video had already made its way to a local musician's page. A pianist with 30,000 followers commented 3 words that drew even more attention. "This is talent." More musicians shared it. A music teacher from another school quoted it. A jazz pianist reposted it with the words, "Prodigy alert." Someone tagged an online classical music forum. The world was waking up to Emma before she even stepped out the door. But Emma didn't know any of this. All she felt was confusion tightening around her like a rope. She walked slowly toward the exit, her shoulders hunched as if trying to hide from the praise still floating down the hallway. Her hands twisted the strap of her backpack nervously. All she had meant to do was play the song her mother loved. She hadn't meant to cause a scene. She certainly hadn't meant to become noticed. The moment she stepped outside, the cold air brushed her face, grounding her slightly. But moments later, she heard footsteps approaching and instinctively backed up, afraid she might be in trouble for something she didn't understand. Keanu approached her slowly, gently, with no sharp movements or heavy footsteps. His eyes were warm, soft, and steady in a way that made her feel a little less like the world was spinning. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emma swallowed hard. "Did I do something wrong?" Emma's voice barely rose above a whisper, but the fear behind it was unmistakable. Her small hands curled into fists at her sides as if bracing for a punishment she couldn't name. The courage she had found at the piano was gone, now replaced by the familiar instinct to shrink and disappear. Keanu knelt down so their eyes were level. His movements were calm, unhurried, the kind of presence that made the noise of the world fade into something gentler. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "You shared something beautiful. That's all." Emma looked away, her breathing shallow, but everyone was staring and clapping. "And I didn't mean to make trouble." Keanu shook his head with quiet certainty. "What you did wasn't trouble. What you did was brave." She hesitated, chewing her lip. Ms. Darrow looked mad. "That wasn't about you," he said, voice firm but still kind. "Sometimes grown-ups forget what matters. They get caught up in their own pride." Emma blinked up at him. "But why were they all looking at me like that?" He smiled faintly. "Because you moved them. Because you reminded them what music is supposed to feel like." A gust of wind rushed through the courtyard, brushing Emma's hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear slowly, trying to make sense of everything swirling around her. Her heart still thumped unevenly. Keanu watched her closely, seeing the fear in her eyes. He recognized it. He had felt it too as a child, when small moments suddenly became big ones, when attention felt more like a threat than a gift. "There's something else," he said gently. "The performance, someone recorded part of it." Her head snapped up in alarm. "Recorded?" He nodded. "You didn't do anything wrong. They just wanted to remember what you played." Emma shook her head quickly, panic rising. No. I didn't want people to see. What if someone laughs? What if they say I'm pretending?" Keanu leaned in a little closer. "Emma," he said, voice steady, "nobody who heard you would ever laugh. They heard your heart. They heard your mother in your music. You honored her." Emma froze. Her breathing stopped for a moment. He continued softly. "The way you played, it came from a place no one can fake. It was real. And people felt that." Her eyes filled not with fear now, but something else. Something fragile and aching. "She'd be proud of you," Keanu said. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it quickly with her sleeve, embarrassed, but Keanu didn't look away. He let her feel it without shame, without pressure. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered one last time. "No," Keanu said. "You're not in trouble." He placed a gentle hand over his heart. "You did something good, something honest. And no matter what happens next, you're not facing it alone." Emma looked up at him again, her expression shifting. Fear loosening warmth, taking its place. Trust beginning its slow and careful bloom. For the first time since the performance ended, she exhaled. The next morning, the community center felt different. The hallways were quieter, as if carrying the weight of whispers. Staff members exchanged glances filled with excitement, confusion, and disbelief. Everyone had seen the video by now. Everyone had heard the child who played like her fingers held a piece of heaven. Everyone except Emma. When she walked through the doors with her backpack slung over one shoulder, she didn't understand why people looked at her differently. Some gave her soft smiles, others gave her space as if sensing her shyness. But the shift made her nervous. She kept her gaze down, and walked straight toward the art room, the place where she usually waited before class. Before she reached it, Lily gently approached her. "Emma, the director wants to see you." Emma froze. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. Her heart sank instantly, certain she had done something wrong after all. Is my dad here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lily nodded with a kind smile. "He came as soon as the center called him." That didn't calm Emma at all. If anything, her fear doubled. As Lily walked her toward the director's office, Emma whispered, Can Mr. Keanu come too?" Lily blinked, surprised. "Of course, I'll get him." A few minutes later, Keanu entered the hallway, his expression gentle but alert. When he saw Emma, small and tense, standing beside her father, he felt his chest tighten again. He gave her a reassuring nod. "I'm right here," he said softly. That simple sentence steadied her feet. The center director, Mrs. Solis, opened the door and welcomed them inside. She was a calm woman in her late 40s with warm brown eyes and a tone that usually soothed anxious families. But today, there was concern written across her face. Emma took a seat beside her father. Keanu sat in the chair, slightly behind her, giving her space, but staying close enough for her to feel supported. Mrs. Solis folded her hands. "Emma, sweetheart, something important happened yesterday." Emma swallowed hard. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Mrs. Solis said quickly and firmly. "Not at all, but a video of your performance was shared online. It spread far more than anyone expected." Emma stiffened. Her father's head shot up. "A video? It wasn't intentional," Mrs. Solis explained. "A staff member recorded it out of awe. We've spoken with her. She didn't mean to cause concern." Emma's eyes filled with panic again. "I didn't mean for anyone to see. I didn't mean—" Her father placed a big working-class hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." But Emma still looked terrified. The praise, the applause, the sudden attention, none of it felt safe to her. She felt exposed, as if her memories and pain had been placed on display. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone calm and grounding. "Emma," he said gently, "they saw your heart, not your mistakes, not anything bad. What they saw was something real." She blinked at him, breathing unevenly. Mrs. Solis softened her voice. "Your performance meant a lot to people, and it meant a lot to us. But before we talk about what comes next, we need to understand more about your story." Emma's father looked down, exhausted. "We haven't had an easy year." Emma's lip trembled, but she nodded. For the first time, she felt like someone truly wanted to listen. Mrs. Solis continued, "Tell us whatever you're comfortable sharing. We want to make sure you're supported." Emma's fingers twisted together. She drew in a shaky breath, and finally, after months of silence, she began to speak. Emma's voice came out thin at first, barely louder than the hum of the heater in the corner. "It was different before," she said. "Before we moved here." Her father lowered his head, shame heavy in his posture. But Emma continued, her eyes fixed on her hands, as if reading the story from her palms. "My mom used to play with me every night. She taught me songs even when she was tired." Her throat tightened, but she kept going. She said music made the bad days softer. Keanu felt the words hit him deep, stirring echoes of his own childhood memories. Emma took a breath. When she got sick, she couldn't play as much, but she still tried. She'd sit beside me and press the keys with one finger. She said as long as I kept playing, she'd never be gone. Her father closed his eyes, pained. Emma's voice wavered. "After she died, we had to sell everything. The piano was the first thing to go. Dad needed money for rent. Then we moved 3 times. And I didn't have anything to practice on." She lifted her backpack and slowly pulled out folded sheets. They were creased, taped, worn from use. Paper piano keys, drawn with a fine black marker. Some lines faded from where her fingers had rubbed them thin. "I used this," she whispered, "for a year. Every day. Even when we didn't have heat. Even when Dad had to work nights. I didn't want to forget what she taught me." Keanu's eyes softened with something close to grief. Not pity, Recognition. Mrs. Solis placed a hand over her heart. Emma, you showed extraordinary strength. Emma's father finally spoke, voice low and rough. I'm doing my best, but I know it isn't enough. She deserves more than I can give her right now. Keanu leaned forward. You've given her the most important thing. You've given her love. Everything else, that's our job to help with. Emma looked up at him, eyes wide with surprise. No one had ever spoken to her father like that, not with judgment, but with respect. Mrs. Solis straightened in her chair. There's also another matter we need to address. Emma tensed. It concerns Ms. Darrow. Emma's father's face hardened instantly. What did that woman do to my kid? Mrs. Solis inhaled. We reviewed the recordings from the classroom cameras. Her behavior was unacceptable. Intentionally humiliating a child is not tolerated here. Emma's shoulders dropped with relief she didn't expect. We'll be speaking with her formally, Mrs. Solis added. There will be consequences. Emma's father nodded sharply. Good. Keanu looked at Emma, his voice gentle again. You didn't deserve any of that. For the first time all morning, Emma allowed herself a small, trembling smile, because suddenly she felt protected, seen, and no longer alone. 2 days after the meeting at the community center, the world around Emma seemed to shift in ways she didn't expect. She was still quiet, still shy, still unsure of the sudden attention, but something softer had settled in her. A gentleness, a tiny spark of hope. What she didn't know was that the video had traveled further than anyone imagined. Across town, in a small sunlit bungalow filled with aging sheet music and framed concert posters from decades past, an elderly woman named Ms. Elena Alvarez sat hunched over her tablet, tears streaming down her cheeks. She watched the video again and again, her wrinkled fingers trembling each time Emma's hands touched the keys. Elena Alvarez had been a celebrated concert pianist in her youth. She once played in grand halls, traveled the world, and taught students who grew up to perform on famous stages. But age had forced her into quiet retirement. Arthritis stiffened her hands, her hearing faded at the edges, and the Steinway upright her husband had bought her on their first anniversary had gone untouched for years. That piano had been her companion through grief, through joy, through decades of life. But now it sat silent in her living room, collecting dust, until she saw Emma. The way Emma played soft, yet brave, young, yet heartbreakingly mature, felt like listening to her younger self. There was something old in that music, something timeless, something that told Ms. Alvarez this child needed more than applause. She needed a chance. Without hesitation, she called the community center. When the director answered, Ms. Alvarez spoke with a voice steady and warm. I saw the child in the video, the one playing Debussy. I want to give her something important. The director listened stunned as the elderly woman described the beautiful Steinway upright, sitting in her home. That piano is meant for her, Ms. Alvarez insisted. I don't want money. I don't want recognition. I just want it to live again in hands that understand it. The director promised to arrange a visit immediately. The next afternoon, Emma and her father arrived at the center expecting a follow-up meeting. Instead, they found Keanu waiting by the front desk holding a slip of paper with an address written in careful cursive. We've been invited somewhere, he told them gently. Someone wants to meet you. Emma blinked in confusion. Me? He nodded. Someone who heard your music. Her father hesitated. Is this safe? Keanu smiled. Very safe and very kind. They traveled together in Emma's father's car, following winding residential streets until they reached a quaint bungalow with a white porch swing and a garden full of soft pink roses. Keanu stepped out first, helping Emma navigate the small path to the front door. Ms. Alvarez opened it even before they knocked. She was tiny, barely taller than Emma, with silver hair tied in an elegant bun and deep brown skin lined with years of laughter and loss. Her eyes sparkled with warmth the moment she saw Emma. You, she said softly, you are the little pianist. Emma froze, unsure how to respond, but Ms. Alvarez stepped aside, gesturing warmly. Come, I want to show you something. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old books, and in the center of the room, bathed in golden afternoon light, stood the Steinway. Emma gasped. Her father stared. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The piano looked like it had been waiting for her, and it had. Emma stepped slowly toward the Steinway, as if approaching something sacred. Her small fingers hovered above the polished wood, not quite touching it yet. She looked up at Ms. Alvarez with wide, uncertain eyes. "May I?" she whispered. Ms. Alvarez smiled, her expression softening. "My dear, that piano has been waiting for you longer than you know. Please, play." Emma slid onto the bench. Her father stood behind her, his hands resting on the backrest as if steadying himself. Keanu remained a few steps away, giving the moment space, his eyes warm with quiet pride. Emma lifted the fallboard, revealing ivory keys worn smooth by decades of music. She placed her fingers on them gently, as though afraid they might vanish. The first note she pressed rang out, rich and warm, deeper than anything she had ever felt through paper. Her breath hitched, then another note, then another. Her hands moved almost on instinct, returning to the melody she had played at the center. But this time it sounded fuller, more complete. The room filled with the sound of a child rediscovering a piece of herself. Ms. Alvarez pressed a trembling hand to her chest, tears glistening in her eyes. She hadn't heard her piano played like this since her own youth. The sound awakened old memories, but instead of pain, they brought peace. When Emma finished, silence fell over the room, a soft, reverent silence. Ms. Alvarez moved toward her slowly. "You play with your soul," she said, "not your hands. That is something no teacher can give. It is something you are born with." Emma dropped her gaze shyly. "My mom taught me." The old woman knelt beside her. "Then your mother left you a gift more precious than anything money can buy." Emma's father wiped his eyes quietly. Ms. Alvarez straightened with surprising strength for her age. "This piano belongs to you now." Emma's head snapped up. "Me? No, I couldn't. It is yours," Ms. Alvarez insisted. "I am too old to play it. My fingers have forgotten their strength. But you will help it sing again." Keanu stepped forward carefully. "At least let me cover half the moving cost. It's only right." But Ms. Alvarez shook her head firmly. "No, you young man already give enough to the world." Keanu bowed his head, slightly humbled, in a way that made the room feel even warmer. Emma touched the piano again, her fingers trembling for an entirely different reason this time. Because for the first time since losing her mother, she felt something she thought she'd never feel again. Home. The Steinway upright settled into their small apartment like a miracle that somehow made the walls feel bigger instead of smaller. Emma's father cleared space for it, near the window, moving old boxes and rearranging furniture until the piano felt like the heart of their home. Sunlight pooled over the keys each morning, warming the room with a soft glow. For the first time since losing her mother, Emma woke up excited to begin the day. She practiced before school, after school, and sometimes quietly, at night when her father was still at work. Each note she played echoed through the apartment and down the hallway, turning their once quiet home into a place that breathed again. Her confidence grew little by little, anchored by the solidity of the keys beneath her fingers. But the real change began when an unexpected opportunity opened. 2 days after receiving the piano, the community center director approached Keanu with news. A well-known music academy in Los Angeles had noticed Emma's viral video. They weren't offering praise, they were offering a scholarship audition. Keanu listened silently, absorbing every detail, then thanked the director with a nod. Later that evening, he made a phone call to someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time, a friend from the music world who owed him nothing, but always respected his sincerity. When Keanu asked if the Academy would consider reviewing Emma personally, the friend didn't hesitate. "For a child like that," he said. "Of course." He arranged an evaluation, not a celebrity favor, but a chance, an open door no one had expected. A week later, Emma and her father sat nervously in the Academy's small practice room. The walls were lined with certificates and framed photos of former students, some performing on international stages. Emma's foot tapped against the floor, her nerves bubbling beneath her calm expression. Keanu arrived a few minutes after them, slipping quietly through the door. He didn't want attention. He didn't want credit. He just wanted Emma to know she wasn't alone. "You ready?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, even though her hands trembled. "I think so." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Just do what you always do, honey." The audition coordinator, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Hall, entered the room. Her posture was formal, but her eyes had a gentleness that immediately eased the tension. "So you're the young pianist from the video," she said with a smile. Emma swallowed and nodded. "Well," Dr. Hall continued, "let's hear what you can do. Don't worry about perfection. Play something that means something to you." Emma settled on the bench, took a slow breath, and began to play the piece her mother taught her, the one she had played both in the community center and in Ms. Alvarez's living room. The music filled the room with a depth and tenderness that made the adults fall silent. When she finished, Dr. Hall didn't speak for several seconds. She simply listened to the last fading echo, processing what she had just heard. Finally, she said, "Emma, have you had formal lessons before?" Emma shook her head. "Only my mom." Dr. Hall exchanged a glance with Keanu, then with Emma's father. "What you have," she said softly, "is rare, very rare, and we'd like to help you grow it." Emma stared at her, barely breathing. Dr. Hall handed her father a packet of papers. "This is a scholarship offer, full tuition instruments and private lessons. If you accept it, Emma can begin next week." Emma's father's eyes filled instantly. He tried to speak, but the words broke in his throat. Keanu stepped back, letting father and daughter take in the moment without him overshadowing it. Because this wasn't his victory, it was hers. Emma began classes at the academy the following week. The first day was overwhelming in the best way. The building buzzed with music violins warming up in one room, flutes practicing scales in another, piano, notes drifting down long hallways. Students carried sheet music tucked under their arms, moving with a confidence Emma wasn't used to seeing. But for once, she didn't feel out of place. She felt like she belonged in a world she had only dreamed about. Her piano instructor, a calm and patient woman named Ms. Lin, welcomed her with a warm smile. "I watched your video," she said, "not for the views, for the soul behind it. You have something special." Emma blushed and looked at the floor. "My mom taught me." Miss Lin nodded gently. "Then she gave you a gift. Our job is to help you use it." Lessons became the brightest part of Emma's week. She practiced scales, learned new pieces, and discovered small techniques that made her fingers move more freely. Every improvement felt like a victory. And every time she sat at the Steinway at home, the sound grew stronger, richer, more confident. Her father noticed the change immediately. He worked long nights, but when he came home early enough to hear her play, he leaned in the doorway and closed his eyes, letting the music wash away the exhaustion. Hope, something he thought he'd lost, began returning to him in small, precious waves. And Keanu, true to his nature, visited quietly. He never made his visits about himself. He never came with crowds or attention. He slipped in after school with a soft greeting, sometimes bringing spare sheet music, sometimes just offering encouragement. "How's the Debussy coming along?" he'd ask. Emma would grin shyly. "Better. I'm learning the middle section now. That's the hardest part," he'd say. "But you've already done harder things." Her father always thanked Keanu, sometimes more than once, but Keanu brushed it off every time. "She's the one doing the work," he'd reply. "I'm just cheering her on." With every passing week, Emma's posture straightened. Her voice grew steadier, and her confidence blossomed. She no longer avoided eye contact. She spoke a little louder, walked a little taller. The girl who once practiced on paper now played on a real piano, studied under real teachers, and carried real dreams. And though Keanu never took credit, everyone could see the truth. He had opened a new world for her, one she was finally ready to step into. By the time March arrived, the community center felt more alive than it had in years. The halls buzzed with activity. Kids laughed louder, practiced harder, and carried a new kind of excitement with them. The staff noticed the change too. Something about Emma's story had awakened a sense of hope, a reminder of why the center existed in the first place. It was during one of these lively afternoons that the announcement came. Mrs. Solis gathered everyone in the main hall, tapping a microphone gently to get the chatter under control. Kids shuffled into rows of folding chairs, whispering and nudging each other. Emma sat toward the front with a few classmates from her art group, her legs swinging nervously as she waited. Keanu stood in the back, as he always did, quiet, careful not to draw attention. He wore a simple jacket and an easy smile, blending in with the other volunteers, even though half the parents now recognized him and whispered whenever he walked past. But he remained modest, humble, and impossible to approach without feeling instantly at ease. "Everyone," Mrs. Solis announced warmly, "I'm excited to share that this year we're bringing back something very special." A ripple of curiosity ran through the room. The spring showcase. Gasps and cheers erupted immediately. Some of the older kids clapped. The younger ones bounced in their seats. It had been 3 years since the last showcase, due to budget cuts, staff shortages, and a string of difficult seasons for the neighborhood. "This event will be open to the community," she continued. "Families, friends, neighbors, local musicians, everyone is invited. And this year we want to highlight talent that has grown right here in this building." Emma felt something flutter in her chest, excitement maybe, or nerves. Mrs. Solis scanned the crowd with a warm smile. "We'll have group performances, art displays, and a finale solo." She paused for effect. A piano solo. Kids murmured, wondering who she would choose. There were several strong players in the center, each hoping for a moment in the spotlight. But instead of announcing a name immediately, Mrs. Solis said, "We'll speak to the selected performer privately after this meeting." Emma relaxed a little. She assumed one of the older students would be chosen, maybe the violin boy who played piano as well, or one of the girls from the intermediate class who practiced twice a week. But when the meeting ended and the others scattered toward their activities, Mrs. Solis approached her quietly. "Emma," she said gently, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Emma froze. Her first instinct was to worry she had done something wrong. Her second was confusion. Why her Keanu watched from a distance, sensing something important was happening. Mrs. Solis led Emma and her father toward her office. Inside, she closed the door softly and took a seat. "I want you to know," she began, "that this decision wasn't made lightly." Emma swallowed her hands, twisting together. "We would like you?" Mrs. Solis continued to perform the solo. Emma's breath caught. Her heart thudded against her ribs. "Me," she squeaked. "But I don't." Her father blinked, stunned but proud. "Are you sure?" he asked the director. Mrs. Solis nodded. "Emma has a gift, and this showcase is about celebrating growth, courage, and heart. She embodies all of that." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "But everyone will be looking at me. What if I mess up? What if—" A gentle knock interrupted her spiraling worry. Keanu stepped into the doorway. "May I?" he asked. Mrs. Solis smiled. "Of course." Emma felt her shoulders loosen the moment he entered. He had that effect. He made fear feel smaller. He knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly, "I heard the news." Emma looked at him with wide, panicked eyes. "I can't do it." He shook his head slowly. "You already did the hardest thing." She blinked. "What's that believing in yourself again?" Emma stared at him, trying to understand how he could say something so simple and make it feel so true. But Keanu didn't look away. His expression held steady, calm, and warm, the way sunlight feels when it breaks through clouds. "You faced a room full of people who expected you to fail," he said gently. "And you didn't run. You didn't hide. You sat at that piano and let your heart speak for you. That took real courage." Emma swallowed her throat tight. "But this is different. Everyone will be waiting. They'll expect something amazing." Keanu shook his head softly. "People expect honesty, not perfection. They want to feel something, and you know how to do that better than anyone." Her father nodded, placing a supportive hand on her back. You've already shown the world what you can do, sweetheart. Emma twisted her fingers together. But what if I get scared again? Then breathe, Keanu said, just like before. And remember, nothing about this is about impressing anyone. It's about sharing something that belongs to you. She looked at him, her breathing slowly evening out. Do you think I can do it? I know you can, Keanu answered, because every time you've played, you've carried someone you love with you. That kind of strength doesn't disappear. Emma's eyes softened. My mom, he nodded. She'll be with you on that stage, too. Silence settled for a moment as she absorbed his words. The fear didn't vanish, but something steadier took its place, a quiet determination that glowed beneath her nervousness. Finally, Emma whispered, Okay, I'll try. Her father exhaled with relief and pride. That's my girl. Mrs. Solis smiled. We're honored to have you as our finale performer, Emma. As they stepped out of the office, Emma walked a little taller, though her hands still trembled slightly. She didn't feel ready, not completely, but she felt supported, and that was enough to take the first step. Before they parted ways, Emma turned to Keanu. Will you come to the concert? Keanu grinned softly, as just another neighbor in the audience. No spotlight, no fuss. Emma smiled for real this time, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who was beginning to believe in herself. The spring showcase was coming, and for the first time, Emma imagined herself standing on that stage, not afraid, but ready. The spring evening arrived with a soft breeze and a golden sky, the kind of evening that made the whole neighborhood feel hopeful. Outside the community center's auditorium, families gathered in excited clusters. Children in neat outfits clutched sheet music. Proud parents snapped photos under the event banner fluttering above the door. Inside the auditorium glowed with warm light. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the room, filled with familiar faces, neighbors, teachers, volunteers, local musicians, and students who came to cheer on their friends. The air hummed with anticipation. Near the front, Emma's father sat in a crisp shirt he had ironed twice, smoothing it nervously every few minutes. His eyes scanned the crowd until he spotted Mrs. Alvarez taking a seat beside him. She wore a soft lavender dress and held a handkerchief already prepared in her lap. You look so proud, she whispered kindly. He laughed softly, wiping at his eyes. I can't help it. Across the room, Keanu entered quietly through a side door wearing a simple black jacket and jeans. He kept his head low, hoping to go unnoticed, choosing a shadowed corner seat near the back. He wasn't here as a celebrity, he was here as someone who cared. When some of the staff spotted him, they nodded with respect, but didn't draw attention. That was exactly how he wanted it. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. The showcase began with group performances, violin ensembles, a small choir, a mixed rhythm group of younger children, tapping drums in uneven but enthusiastic harmony. Each performance brought its own applause, but the tension in the air grew steadily toward the finale. Backstage. Emma stood near the curtain, gripping her hands together. Her dress was simple and pale blue, chosen by her father because it reminded him of something her mother once wore. But Emma barely noticed the fabric. Her heart thudded so loudly she could feel it in her throat. Her instructor, Miss Lynn, knelt beside her. How do you feel? She asked gently. Scared, Emma whispered. That's normal, Ms. Lynn said, but remember why you're playing. Not for them. She tapped Emma's chest lightly. For her. Emma nodded, swallowing hard. The stage manager peeked backstage. Final performer ready. Emma stepped forward, her legs trembling slightly. As she approached the curtain, the spotlight warmed the edge of the stage, casting a soft glow that made the auditorium look enormous. She felt smaller than ever. The crowd blurred into a sea of silhouettes, but then she saw a figure in the back, a quiet figure sitting in the dark corner. Keanu. He wasn't waving or calling out. He just nodded once, slow and steady, the same way he always did when she needed grounding. Emma breathed out shakily. The curtain opened. She walked onto the stage, each step gentle and unsure. The lights felt blinding. The audience seemed to hold its breath as she approached the piano, the bench already waiting for her. She sat down slowly. Her hands, which had been trembling backstage, now rested above the keys. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she pictured her mother sitting beside her on their old bench, touching one key at a time, whispering, "Let the music carry you. Don't force it." Emma inhaled deeply and began to play. The opening notes drifted into the auditorium like a soft breeze. The melody was the same one she had played on the worst day of her life, the day Ms. Darrow tried to break her spirit. But now it wasn't tied to shame. It was tied to healing. The melody unfolded gently, each note rising into the quiet auditorium and settling like warm light across every listening face. Emma's fingers no longer shook. They moved with a grace that seemed to belong to someone older, someone shaped by both pain and resilience. With every measure, she shed a little more of the fear she carried. In its place grew something stronger, something freer. People leaned forward in their seats. Some pressed their hands to their hearts without realizing it. Others wiped their eyes when the soft, trembling beauty of her playing washed over them. Even the youngest children, usually restless and fidgety, sat still as statues. Miss Alvarez cried openly. Her handkerchief was already soaked, her chest rising with labored, emotional breaths. Emma's father covered his mouth with one hand, tears slipping through his fingers. He had never seen his daughter like this, not overwhelmed, not frightened, but glowing. And at the very back, Keanu remained motionless, his eyes glistening in the dim corner light. He saw more than talent. He saw strength. He saw healing. He saw a child reclaiming something that had been stolen from her. Halfway through the piece, Emma hit the section that once terrified her, the place where her hands had trembled years ago, when her mother first struggled to guide her sick hands across the keys. Emma paused only for a breath. Then she pushed through. Her fingers swept upward, climbing the keys in a shimmering run that filled the hall with emotion so raw it felt like the walls themselves were listening. She played not as the frightened girl from the community center's classroom, but as a child who had survived, who had learned to grow again, who carried her mother's love with her in every note. By the time she reached the final passage, the room was already weeping. Even some of the staff wiped their eyes. A soft sob broke somewhere in the front row, followed by another. The last chord rang out, clear and warm. Emma held it for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was deep and reverent, the kind that only comes after something holy. And then an eruption. The entire room surged to its feet. Applause thundered through the auditorium. People shouted her name. Some cried. Some clapped until their palms stung. The sound was overwhelming, but it didn't frighten her this time, because the first person she looked at was Keanu. He was already standing, his hands joined in a steady, heartfelt applause, his expression glowing with pride. Emma felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of everything she thought she had lost finally returning to her. The standing ovation didn't stop, because everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. The applause still echoed faintly in Emma's ears long after she stepped off the stage. She walked backstage in a daze, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, unsure if any of it had truly happened. The warm lights, the cheering, the standing ovation. It all felt too big, too bright, too unreal. Her heart fluttered in her chest, but it wasn't fear this time. It was joy, pride, relief. Her father reached her first. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, his voice cracking as he whispered, "You were incredible. You were everything your mother dreamed of." Emma hugged him tighter, letting herself melt into the comfort she had missed for so long. She felt grounded, safe, and whole. When they finally separated, she noticed someone standing a few steps away, wringing her hands. The sight made Emma freeze. It was Ms. Darrow. Her posture was small, not rigid and cold like before. Her shoulders drooped, her expression fragile. She looked nothing like the woman who once humiliated Emma. Instead, she looked like someone carrying heavy regret. Emma instinctively stepped back, pressing closer to her father. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but didn't move to shield her. He waited. Ms. Darrow swallowed hard before speaking. "Emma? May I talk to you?" Her voice wasn't commanding, it wasn't sharp, it trembled. Emma hesitated, then she nodded slightly. Ms. Darrow took a careful step closer. "I owe you an apology," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "A real one, not the kind adults say just to fix things temporarily." She paused, gathering courage. "I was wrong, deeply wrong. I let my pride and my frustrations turn into cruelty, and you didn't deserve any of it." Emma stared at her, unsure how to respond. Ms. Darrow's voice thickened. "When I saw you on that stage tonight, I realized how much I failed you, how much I underestimated you." She blinked rapidly, her composure slipping. "You were extraordinary, and I didn't see it. Worse, I didn't try to." Emma's father crossed his arms, but didn't interrupt. His eyes remained sharp, watching the woman who had once made his daughter feel so small. Ms. Darrow lowered her gaze. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did, but I hope someday you can forgive me." Emma felt her throat tighten. Months ago, she would have crumbled under the weight of those memories. She would have run or cried or hid behind her father. But today, something inside her felt different. She had grown, she had healed, and some part of her understood that forgiveness was not about excusing the past, but freeing herself from it. Emma stepped forward. "I forgive you," she said softly. "I just don't want anyone else to feel like I did." Ms. Darrow covered her mouth as her eyes filled. "Neither do I," she whispered. The tension in the room softened. At that moment, Keanu appeared near the entrance curtain. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched his expression, warm and proud, knowing this was Emma's moment, not his. Her father caught sight of him and motioned him over. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice heavy with emotion. "I need to thank you." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't have to." But her father insisted, gripping Keanu's hand firmly. "You gave Emma back her heart." Keanu lowered his eyes, humbled. "She did that herself," he said quietly. "I just witnessed it." Emma looked between her father and Keanu, her small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of emotions she was still learning to navigate. The warmth in the room wrapped around her like a quilt. Not the warmth of the stage lights anymore, but the warmth of people who finally saw her. Not as a burden, not as an invisible kid, not as the girl with paper keys, but as Emma. Ms. Alvarez approached next, leaning on her polished wooden cane. Her eyes glistened as she took Emma's hands gently into her own. "You played like someone who remembers love even when life tries to make you forget," she said. "Your mother would have felt every note." Emma bit her lip as tears brimmed again. Ms. Alvarez pulled her into a soft embrace, the kind only a grandmotherly figure could give. "Take care of that piano for me," she whispered. "It listens when you play, and it listens when you cry." When they separated, the hallway buzzed with quiet chatter as people packed up programs, children tugged on their parents' sleeves, and staff members turned off stage lights. But within their small circle, Emma, her father Keanu, and Ms. Alvarez, time felt slower. Emma's father rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't know a place like this, or people like you, would ever be part of our lives again. For a long time, everything felt temporary." He looked at Emma, his voice cracking. "Tonight felt like the first thing that's ours." Keanu nodded gently. "Then hold on to it," he said, "and build from here." A staff member called Emma's father to sign some release forms, and he stepped away. Emma stayed with Keanu, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing the ends of her concert dress. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said, kneeling to be eye level with her. Do you think it's okay to be happy again?" The question hit him with unexpected weight. He felt the memory of his sister Kim push gently at the edges of his heart, her courage, her pain, the way she smiled, even on the dark days. He remembered asking himself that same question once, so he answered the only way he knew would honor her. "I think your mother would want you to be," he said, "and I think you're stronger than you know." Emma's eyes shimmered. She nodded slowly. Her father returned, paperwork finished. He placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get you home." Emma hugged Keanu without hesitation, her small arms wrapping around him with gratitude that needed no words. He held her gently, careful, respectful, with the quiet understanding of someone who knew the healing power of moments like these. When she stepped back, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Keanu smiled softly. "Never stop playing, Emma." She turned, walked toward her father, and for the first time in a very long time, her steps felt light. The night air outside the community auditorium felt cool and calm, carrying the soft hum of traffic and the faint echo of applause still ringing in Keanu's ears. When the doors closed behind him and everyone else drifted home in warm clusters of conversation, he walked down the quiet sidewalk alone. Not lonely, just thoughtful. The kind of thoughtful that only came after witnessing something pure. Streetlights glowed above him, steady and gentle. Each step he took gave him space to breathe, to replay the moment that changed everything. The moment Emma stood on stage and played not with fear, not with doubt, but with the full weight of every memory she had ever carried. That sound lived in him now. It wasn't something he could forget. He kept walking, hands tucked into the pockets of his old jacket, eyes soft but distant. He thought about how small Emma looked on that stage, how she trembled at first, how she had searched the crowd for a face she trusted before placing her hands on the keys, how she had found her strength again, not from instruction or pressure, but from something deeper, something only she could unlock. Hope. Hope shaped like a melody. Keanu let out a slow breath, the kind that carried both relief and heartbreak. He had seen a lot in his life: fame, loss, loneliness, kindness, cruelty, and yet few things stayed with him the way the courage of quiet people did. People like Emma. People who didn't ask for attention, who didn't pretend to be strong, but somehow found strength when it mattered most. He stopped at an intersection and watched the light change from red to green. Cars passed by in a slow blur. A father pedaled past on a bike with his daughter in a small trailer behind him, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed bear. For a moment, Keanu wondered what Emma might have been like before loss reshaped her, before grief dimmed her voice, before fear taught her to become invisible. But something happened tonight, something he knew she would carry with her forever. She stepped back into the light, not because someone pushed her, not because she had something to prove, but because she finally remembered who she was before the world tried to convince her she was small. Keanu smiled faintly, barely noticeable, but real. A soft warmth spread across his chest as he continued walking. He thought about Emma's father, how gratitude had filled the man's eyes, how his voice broke when he thanked Keanu for giving his daughter back her heart. But the truth was simple, and Keanu knew it deeply. "She did that herself," he murmured to the quiet street. "I just witnessed it." The city around him felt different now, softer, kinder, because tonight reminded him of something he sometimes forgot, that the smallest act of compassion, even something as simple as standing in the back of a room and believing in someone, could alter the entire direction of a child's life. He remembered watching Emma earlier that day, hunched over and nervous, convinced she didn't belong near music anymore. And then he remembered the moment she lifted her hands from the keys after her performance, the tears on her cheeks, the applause rising like a wave, the light returning to her eyes like the dawn after a long night. People often talked about talent like it was a gift. But tonight, Keanu saw the truth more clearly than ever. Real talent was often born from pain. Real strength was often shaped by struggle. And sometimes it only needed one quiet moment of encouragement to rise to the surface again. Emma didn't just play music tonight. She reminded everyone what hope sounds like. And hope, he knew, was louder than any cruelty, stronger than any fear, and capable of lighting even the darkest parts of a person's life. Keanu reached the corner where his motorcycle was parked. The engine was cold, but the night around him felt warm with meaning. He stood there a little longer, breathing it in. Tonight was special. Tonight mattered. Keanu sat on his motorcycle, but didn't start it yet. The helmet rested in his hands as he looked back toward the glowing auditorium doors in the distance. People were still trickling out laughing, talking, carrying the warmth of the night home with them. Somewhere inside, Emma and her father were probably still accepting hugs, still hearing congratulations, still standing in a spotlight they both thought life had taken from them forever. He felt grateful to have witnessed it, grateful to have been there on the day a broken heart began to heal. Sometimes he thought the world tried to make quiet children vanish. Life overwhelmed them. Hardship silenced them. Circumstances pushed them into corners where no one looked, but tonight proved something else. Something he wished every child could learn. Invisible didn't mean unworthy, forgotten didn't mean finished, and broken didn't mean beyond repair. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment as the cool breeze brushed against him. He thought of his own childhood, the lost moments, the people who had offered him small mercies, the teachers who didn't know they'd been lifelines, the kind strangers who had shown him patience when he didn't know how much he needed it. Every gesture had shaped the man he became. Sometimes he wondered what would have happened if those moments hadn't existed. Maybe that was why Emma's story hit him so deeply, because he saw in her what he once saw in himself. A spirit dimmed but not defeated, a talent waiting in silence, a heart holding more strength than anyone realized. He finally placed his helmet on and tightened the strap. Before starting the engine, he whispered words meant for no one but himself, yet powerful enough to echo into tomorrow. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the turning point of someone else's life. He believed that, and tonight had proved it again. As he pulled onto the road and the city lights stretched out before him, he thought one last time about Emma's final note, the one that lingered in the air like a promise. A note that said she was not done. A note that said she was rising. And as he rode into the quiet night, he hoped everyone who watched her play felt the same thing he did. Hope. True, steady, healing hope. Before you go, think about this. Have you ever met someone who changed your life with a simple act of kindness? And what story would you like to see Keanu Reeves in next?